ओके, क्या हाल है सबका? खैर खैरियत से? होप एवरीवन इज गुड। और अब नेक्स्ट टेस्ट की तैयारी कर रहे होंगे सारे के सारे, वायरोलॉजी के टेस्ट की। ठीक है, वेनेसडे का आपका वायरोलॉजी का टेस्ट है। होपफुली इस टेस्ट की ज्यादा अच्छी तैयारी होगी एज कम्पेयर टू द प्रीवियस टेस्ट। एनी क्वेश्चंस अगर कुछ पूछना है तो बेटा पूछ लो, या ये है कि फेसबुक के पेज के ऊपर मेरे से क्वेरीज डाल दो ताकि ये क्या कैन आंसर दोस क्वेरीज फॉर यू। एक तो मुझे समझ नहीं आती, आप लोगों को मैं बार बार कहती हूँ कि आप लोग के पास फेसबुक का पेज है, उसको यूटिलाइज करो और उसमें क्वेश्चंस जो हैं जो आपको डिफिकल्ट लगते हैं वो आप वहाँ पे पूछो। बट वहाँ पे आप कुछ पूछते नहीं हो और टेस्ट में आप कुछ करते नहीं हो, ठीक है ना? फिर टेस्ट में आपकी जो अटेम्प्ट्स हैं वो दे आर नॉट अप टू द मार्क, फिर चीज़ें गड़बड़ हो जाती हैं। सो एनी कमेंट्स? कोई कमेंट नहीं है, कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है, कोई क्वेरी नहीं है? वायरोलॉजी से नहीं है, पैरासाइटोलॉजी आप जो पढ़ रहे हो उसमें से कोई क्वेश्चंस? ओके, या तो लगता है कि आप लोगों को सब कुछ बहुत अच्छी तरह से आता है या आपको बिल्कुल कोई आइडिया नहीं कि आप क्या पढ़ रहे हो। ठीक है ना? और अभी तक जितनी न्यूज़ आ रही हैं और जितनी यूएचएस से मैंने इंफॉर्मेशन ली है उसके अकॉर्डिंगली तो यू पीपल आर गोइंग टू हैव योर एग्जाम्स ऑन टाइम। थोड़ा बहुत शायद आगे पीछे भी यूएचएस करने को तो तैयार नहीं है, बट आई डोंट नो हाउ दे आर गोइंग टू मैनेज एवरीथिंग। बट जो वीसी हैं यूएचएस के, उनकी जो लास्ट वीडियो कॉन्फ्रेंस थी उसके अंदर तो ही हैज शोन द प्रॉमिस कि जी आपका जो है आपके टाइम पे ही आपके एग्जाम्स होंगे अकॉर्डिंग टू द स्केड्यूल विच हैज ऑलरेडी बीन गिवन। सो शुड वी स्टार्ट? शुरू करें? सब लोगों को वॉइस क्लियर आ रही है? Okay, so last time हमने we started about a couple of weeks ago with the topic of protozoology. Just give me 1 second. started with protozoology, and we studied three of the parasites which I told you were of importance. First one was the Entamoeba histolytica, that was the intestinal protozoa, and then we had the intestinal flagellates, in which we studied the um, uh, giardia. Then we had the urogenital organism, which was the Trichomonas vaginalis, and then we started with the Cryptosporidium. So let's discuss Cryptosporidium. Then we will be finished with the portion of protozoology apart from the blood and tissue flagellates. Blood and tissue flagellates you've already done with Dr. Majid, and so we've completed that course as well. So today we are going to start, after doing Cryptosporidium, we are going to start with the helminthology as well. So, Cryptosporidium we discussed was a parasite that causes diarrheal diseases, and this diarrheal disease is known as cryptosporidiasis. Cryptosporidium parvum and hominis, they are the two pathogenic species of the Cryptosporidium. Basically, it's an enteric parasite, that is, it is going to cause the intestinal infections, and as we've studied ant amoeba and giardia, and this is the third commonest diarrhea causing pathogen in the world. It is found in most parts of the world, but most commonly it is seen in Asia, Africa, Australia, and South Africa. Transmission is through the fecal-oral route, but it could be transmitted with the help of fomites, that is the inanimate objects. They can be contaminated, and if our hands get contaminated with it, we can transfer it to the mouth. Then drinking water. Even after chlorination, this water is not able to kill all of the cysts of the Cryptosporidium. Higher concentration of chlorine is required to kill these cysts as compared to the normal chlorination concentration which is used in water treatment. Then in the swimming pools, if the swimming pool water gets contaminated with the cysts of Cryptosporidium, it can be a source of infection, because as I mentioned, the chlorination process which is normally carried out does not kill the cyst, does not destroy the cyst. Unpasteurized apple cider. Apple cider, as you know, is made from, it's a vinegar which is made from the raw apples, and if it is consumed as such, it could get contaminated, because pasteurization process, as you studied in general bacteriology, is a process which is going to kill the bacteria. And if we do not carry out that process, it can kill the bacteria, the viruses, and other vegetative forms which are present within that material. So if you are going to use unpasteurized, it could be a source of infection. Then animal contact or food contact, all of them, they can be the routes of transmission of this cyst. Simple life cycle, in which you see that the cyst is the infective stage of this organism. It is also the infective stage, and it is also the diagnostic stage. So when we are talking about the diagnosis, we are talking about the examination of the stool for the presence of the cysts of Cryptosporidium. These cysts, they are passed out into fecal matter, and they develop within the soil, and afterwards they can contaminate the water and the food. And this contaminated food, water, or the swimming pool water, these can be a source of cysts which could be inhaled by the, sorry, not inhaled, ingested by the host. And once they ingest it, they're going to go into the intestinal tract, and then they can pass through the various stages of the life cycle, and then they are going to develop and be passed out as these thick-walled oocysts into the environment. So this shows you the various stages. Number one is the thick-walled oocyst, which is going to convert into a sporozoid once it reaches the intestine, and in the intestine it's going to get attached to the intestinal lumen, and from the intestinal lumen again it is going to convert into the trophozoids. The trophozoids are then going to be cause the damage to the intestinal epithelial cells, and then they can then pass out into the fecal matter in the form of these cysts. Okay, so what you need to remember is that basically this life cycle for the cryptosporidium. Host, wide range of hosts. Basically, these are the vertebrates like humans, but birds, reptiles, and other mammals, they can also act as the host for the cryptosporidium. The morphological forms includes the trophozoid as well as the oocyst. Trophozoid is the same amoeboid form which is going to be present within the intestines, and it develops from the oocyst after the excistation process. It is going to cause damage to the intestinal epithelium, cause the various signs and symptoms of the disease, and when it is going to be transformed into the oocyst, it will develop a double wall around itself, and this double wall is going to cause resistance to chlorine, to drying, excessive temperatures, or like heat or freezing, and then also to the salted water. This part of the life cycle is that which it lives in the environment. Otherwise it is going to when this cyst enters into the human beings, when they are ingested, they are going to impact itself into the gut epithelium, and this cyst then releases the sporozoids, which are then going to be converted into the trophozoites, and the trophozoites, they are going to undergo reproduction and produce large numbers, which are going to cause damage to the epithelial cells. In the diagnosis, we have the number one is the acid-fast stain of the infected feces. Number two is the direct immunofluorescent antibody staining using monoclonal antibody to the oocyst wall. Or you can carry out a modified acid-fast oocyst stain. Modified acid-fast or the acid-fast stain is because this oocyst wall is not going to be visible in the routine staining procedures which we carry out. Incubation period is about 7 days, and the range is 2 to 10 days. Immunocompetent patients which may present with a diarrheal illness that is self-limiting, and it resolves within a period of 2 to 3 weeks. However, if the patient is immunocompromised, it could be anything like diabetes, or it could be cancer, or it could be any other condition which is causing a drop in the immunity of that individual. In such cases, the cryptosporidium causes a much severer form of the disease, and it could even result in causing life-threatening complications like malabsorption and wasting of an individual. So when you are asked the question about immunocompromised infection, parasitic infections, in case of an immunocompromised individual, the parasitic infections in immunocompromised individuals, number one is the cryptosporidium, and the other one, as we go on, you must have studied the toxoplasma. So amongst the immunocompromised individuals, this is a very severe illness which can cause life-threatening complications. Diarrheal illness may be accompanied by fever, may be accompanied by fatigue. The patient is unable to perform the normal life function, normal daily activities. And as the disease progresses, because of the damage to the intestinal epithelium, absorption of nutrients from that surface is decreased, as a result of which there is malnutrition, and there is wasting of the individual. Generally, this can occur either in adults or in children. Small intestine is the primary site of infection, but it can go into the pulmonary or the biliary tract, resulting in infection in those sites as well. Any questions regarding this? It's a simple It's a simple parasite, and what you just need to remember is the what you need to remember is basically the host, what are the infective form of this parasite, what is the transmission route, and most importantly that it is the parasite which is going to be more disease, it is going to result in more harmful effects in an individual who is immunocompromised. Okay, so let's go on to the next portion of our lecture today, and that is about helminthology. If you remember, when we started with the parasitology, I gave you a classification. I've also put up a classification on the Facebook page we share. Uh, Parasitology was divided into two parts: protozoology and helminthology. Helminthology was further subdivided into nemathelminthes, or the roundworms or the nematodes, and then the platyhelminthes or the flatworms. We are going to start with the nemathelminthes or the nematodes. So nematodes could be intestinal, in which case they are going to have an effect on in the either the interest in the small intestine or the large intestine, and some of them are somatic, that is they are going to go into the tissues and cause a disease in those areas. Intestinal nematodes which you need to remember include Ascaris lumbricoides, which is also known as commonly as a roundworm, or Urdu mein, when you go into the clinical side and when you are taking a history, and if you happen to come across a patient who is suffering from a worm diseases, तो बच्चों में जो सबसे commonest है वो Ascaris lumbricoides है. And if they are going to give you the history कि जी बच्चे नु मलप ने, so malap is the Urdu word which is used for the roundworm Ascaris lumbricoides. Then we have the second Trichinellus spiralis, which causes trichinosis. Then we have Strongyloides stercoralis, Ankylostoma duodenale and Neketa americanus. Both of them have similar features, with the exception that the Ankylostoma duodenale is very common in our area and Necatar is not. Then we have the Dracunculus medinensis, which is also known as the Medina worm. So these are the intestinal nematodes, and then we have the subdivision into which are going to be present in the large intestine. These are the Trichuris trichura and the Entrobius vermicularis. So these Ascaris, Trichinellus, Strongyloides, Ankylostoma, and Dracunculus are present in the small intestine, whereas the Trichuris trichura, which is commonly known as the whipworm, and the Entrobius vermicularis, which is known as the pinworm, both of them they are going to be present in the large intestine. Remember these classifications because these classifications are going to be very helpful in you answering the viva questions during the exam. Also, when you are attempting a question, an SEQ question, if you know these classifications, you would not be able, you would be very easily able to identify the clinical history and the pathogen associated with that clinical history. If the clinical scenario gives a patient who is going to present with symptoms, or who is going to present with symptoms which are related to the large intestine, then you can easily pinpoint the nematodes of that area, and from the other features given in the clinical history or in the diagnosis, you can decide amongst these two which is going to be the causative agent. Similarly, if the features point towards the small intestine, then you can identify from the last list which we discussed. Somatic nematodes would be found in the lymphatic system. They can be found in the lungs, subcutaneous tissue, mesentery, and the conjunctiva. There are a few, and we will discuss them after we've discussed the nematodes. So, nematodes are the intestinal roundworms. Commonly, they are also known as the intestinal roundworms, and there are certain characteristics which are common to all. Amongst this, number one is that They can be found in both free living as well as the parasitic forms. Like Entrobius, it can be found only in on the human beings, and it does not survive in the environment, whereas the Strongyloides has both a free living phase, which is going to be present in the environment, and then there will be a pathogenic phase which is going to be present within the human beings. Size of the adult ranges from a few millimeters to more than 1 meter. So they can be as large as 1 meter, more than 1 meter. And a worm who is about half a meter in size, and it is coiled up in the intestines. You can very well imagine the complications and the symptoms which it is going to produce if it is going to be present in a child or in an adult. Nematodes, they have separate sexes. That is, they will be a male parasite and then they will be a female parasite. Mating of the two would result in the formation of the offsprings or the newer generation. So this is not going to be a reproduction by binary fission. This is going to be a reproduction by mating of the two different species. Male is generally smaller than the female, and you can identify the male by a posterior curved portion. So most of these nematodes, in case of the male, they will have a posterior end which is going to be curved. They're going to be smaller as compared to the females. And another important characteristic of these parasites is that they have a buccal area. The buccal capsule or the buccal area, which is going to contain either hooks, they are going to contain teeth or cutting plates. So different types of pathogen, the parasites will have different types of जिसको कहना चाहिए औजार or tools to attach themselves to the intestinal wall. They can either attach themselves to the intestinal wall with the help of hooks, teeth, or with cutting plates. And once they attach themselves to the intestinal wall, then they can start sucking onto the blood and onto the nutrients from the intestinal lumen from the intestinal wall, and then they start producing the various signs and symptoms of the disease. Whatever the host, it may have more than one host, and in man is the definitive host for the for the nematodes. So you have an intermediate host and then you have a definitive host. In case of nematodes, man is the definitive host. Remember that. So if anybody is among you are being asked questions about the nematodes, and you are going to be asked about say the host of Enterobius vermicularis, you can simply remember that all the nematodes, they have a definitive host in the form of man. And if they're asking you a definitive host, you can easily in 1 second give the answer if you remember these general points. Now let's go on to Ascaris, the first organism which we are going to study today. Ascaris lumbricoides is also known as it's an intestinal roundworm. It is also known as the Malap, as I told you, or the roundworm, and it is causing a disease which is known as Ascariasis. It's the largest roundworm of man, and it's the commonest human helminthic infection. जितने भी हमने ये भी और मैंने list किए organisms, इनमें से this is the commonest, and it is not only common in children in the age group of 5 to 9 years, but it can occur at all ages. So even adults at times present with complications of so coming back to the nematodes, and we were talking about the we did the classification, ठीक है. Intestinal, small and large intestine, and somatic हो गया. Intestinal के ये 5 नाम है जो कि small intestine में मौजूद है. Then we have in the large intestine Trichuria and the Enterobius vermicularis. Then somatic nematodes, we'll study them as we go ahead. The intestinal nematodes, we discussed that there were few characteristics which are common to all of them. Number one, some of them, they are just parasitic, that is, they are going to survive only on the host, whereas others, they have both the parasitic as well as the free living phases of the life cycle. Adult size may range from a few millimeters to more than 1 meter. millimeter. Separate sexes, both the male and females are present, and the male you recognize with the help of a curved posterior end. Anterior end has a buccal cavity or a buccal capsule, and this can contain hooks, teeth, or cutting plates, and this is a means by means of which the parasite is going to get attached to the intestinal wall and take up its nutrients and blood from the intestinal wall. And man is the definitive host for the intestinal nematodes. Then we have the Ascaris, and Ascaris is going to Ascaris lumbricoides. It's all causes a disease which is known as Ascariasis, and it is commonly known as the roundworm. Also, in the layman's language. Then we have certain characteristics of the Ascaris lumbricoides. This is the roundworm, and this roundworm looks just like an earthworm. It's the largest roundworm of man or largest intestinal nematode, and it is also the commonest helminthic infection. Although children are more commonly affected by this parasite, the adults, they can be equally affected. And as you can see, more than 1 billion people all over the world, they are infected with the Ascaris lumbricoides. Geographically, you have a cosmopolitan distribution, which means it's a worldwide distribution. It is found throughout the temperate and tropical areas of the globe, but more commonly it is seen in conditions of poor sanitation. Almost 100% of the population will harbor the parasite if the hygienic conditions are poor, if the availability of washrooms, if the availability of water, if the sewage is properly isn't proper. So all of these are going to contribute to the development or the occurrence of the parasitic infection, Ascaris lumbricoides. Morphologically, as I told you, it's the largest of the nematodes. This is the female parasite, and this is the male parasite. This is the anterior end. This is the posterior end. And the posterior end, in case of the male, it is going to be curved. Why do we need to know these differences between the two? Because when we are carrying out the diagnostic procedures, one way by means of which at times we can identify a parasitic infection is through these worms which may be passed out into the stool. So if we just know the morphology of the female and we don't know about the male, then we would not be able to identify them. So between the two, you just need to remember that both of them, the female is longer. Number two, the female has a posterior end which is straight, whereas in case of the male, it is a curved. Eggs, when they are passed in the feces, the mammillated layer is bile stained to a golden brown. So this is the egg of the Ascaris lumbricoides, and we are going to look for these eggs when we are going to carry out a stool examination in a person who is complaining of symptoms related to a parasitic infection. And since this is going to pass from the small intestine down to the large intestine, so in the small intestine, as you all know, the bile is also being secreted out into the intestine, into the lumen. And when this bile is going to be secreted, and as the eggs they pass out through this through this lumen, these eggs they get stained a yellowish brown. So when we are carrying out a okay beta. Give me 1 minute, I'll just close this and I will start अगेन इसमें कुछ हिच आ रही है, ठीक है। आई एम गोइंग टू रीस्टार्ट ये जो मीटिंग है ना। Just give me a minute. I'm sorry for this inconvenience. ठीक है, चलो let's see. अच्छा, अब चेंज हो रही है स्लाइड्स। Okay, so largest roundworm, commonest human infection, ages most commonly are the 5 to 8. ठीक है, उसके बाद geographically we discussed it was a worldwide distribution, but more common under conditions of poor sanitation. 100% of the population is going to harbor the parasite if the community has poor sanitary conditions, poor sewage, poor water and water supply, which is contaminated. Morphologically, slides change हो रही हैं। अब तो कोई issue नहीं है slides में बेटा। Okay, so then we go on to the morphology. As I was discussing, you just need to remember that the worms are male and female. Both of them are going to be present in the small intestine. The female is going to be longer as compared to the male, and the male has a posterior curved end. Then the when the life cycle is going to progress within the small intestine, the mating of the male and the female species is going to take place, which is going to result in the passage of eggs, passing of the eggs by the female. And these eggs, they are going to be passed out into the intestine, since the intestine, small intestine, will have the bile as well in its contents. They are going to stain the ova as brown in color, and this can be seen when we carry out the stool examination in such patients. These are the eggs of the Ascaris lumbricoides when they are freshly passed out. You can see this is a wet preparation which has not been stained. You can just see the brownish coloring of the ovum which is in the center, and then this is the wall of the Ascaris lumbricoides. And this, if you can see these laminations, they are the gelatinous material which is or coating around it. Habitat: adult worms are going to live in the intestine of man, basically the duodenum and the upper part of the ileum. And man is the only definitive host. So it is going to pass from humans to humans. There is not going to be an intermediate host. So what I am trying to say is that the parasite lives within the intestines of the human beings. It is going to mate there. It is going to the female is then going to start producing the eggs. These eggs are going to be passed out into the into the fecal matter. From the fecal matter, they are going to go into the environment where they are going to undergo a few developmental stages, and then they pass directly through the contaminated food or water into the mouth, and from the mouth they go into the intestine. So there is no intermediate host which is going to help in completing the life cycle of the Ascaris lumbricoides. There is just going to be one host. This is a definitive host, and it is man. You need to remember this, because when we are asking you questions about, it's a simple, Ascaris is a very common parasite and a very common infection amongst the children, and therefore it is generally asked in your viva. And when we are asking you about what is the definitive host, you people really have no idea about it. So as I told you previously, just remember that the definitive host in case of all the nematodes is man. Starting with the life cycle, the adult worm is going to live in the lumen of the small intestine. And just imagine a female after mating is going to produce 200,000 eggs per day. And these are going to be passed out into the fecal matter. 200,000 eggs per day, not in a year, not in her whole lifespan, just in one day. Imagine the amount which is being passed out into the fecal matter. Imagine how many of them are going to die. And even if 50% of them die, or even 25% are survive, you still have a huge figure of eggs which are being passed each day and surviving in the environment. Consequently, they can be transmitted to so many individuals, and that is why if the sanitation and hygiene conditions are not good, it spreads widely in a community. Infection occurs by ingestion of the food which is contaminated with the fertilized eggs. Unfertilized eggs, दो स्टेजेस होती हैं इसकी as it passes through the developmental stages. पहले unfertilized stage है and then it is the fertilized stage. तो fertilized stage जो है वो infective है, unfertilized stage जो है that is not infective. Even if it is ingested तो वो destroy हो जाएगी, so it is not going to produce an infection. Passage of the eggs. The passage of the eggs are through the fecal matter, and the ovum is present within the fertilized eggs. ठीक है? So when they are freshly passed, they are not going to be infective. That means कि जब वो human body में से pass out हो रहे in the fecal matter, they are in the unfertilized stage. या they are in that stage which is not infective. वो environment में रह के survive करता है उसमें आपके environment में, और in the soil it goes through a few stages, and then its developmental stage from the uninfective to the infective form does not occur within the human beings, it occurs in the environment. So first step in the life cycle of Ascaris lumbricoides is the passage of the eggs, and the unsegmented ovum are passed out into the feces. When they are freshly passed, they are not going to be infected. Then the second phase is the development in the soil. Eggs, they are going to be resistant to chemical disinfectants. They are going to therefore survive for months in the sewage, but they can be killed by heat. 40 degrees for 15 hours, that is enough to kill them. They become infective after 18 days to several weeks. So it takes roughly 2 weeks to any number of weeks, depending upon the environmental conditions, for these eggs to become infective. और इन्फेक्शन होने के लिए, इन्फेक्टिव बनने के लिए, they have to pass through certain larval stages. अब ये टाइम पीरियड जो है from a few weeks, from 2 weeks to several weeks क्यों है? Because वार्मथ चाहिए, मॉइस्चर चाहिए, शेड चाहिए, हीट नहीं होनी चाहिए. All of these things, they are going to contribute to the development of these forms, and if all of them are provided optimally, so they will take the shortest time period. लेकिन अगर ज़्यादा ये अगर for example it is not it's a dry season, warmth भी है, so either they are going to be destroyed or they will remain there because the wall is very resistant, और जब conditions optimal होंगी, it will start developing. First stage larva develops after 1 week, and this occurs because of the segmentation of the ovum. So first stage larva after 1 week, first stage से 1 week याद रखो, और segmentation of the ovum होगी. Then first molting occurs. Okay, and this molting results in the formation of the second stage larva, and this is known as the rhabditiform larva. And this is the infective form of the larva, which is going to produce the infection. And this occurs 3 weeks after the passage of the eggs. अब ये जो first molting के बाद जो second stage का larva बनता है, that remains infective इनफेक्टिव फॉर 3 years. ठीक है, सो अगर वो एक सॉइल में आपका एक हेलमिंथ का या एस्कैरिस का फीकल मैटर में पास्ट आउट ओवम या एक पड़ा हुआ है और उसने सेकेंड स्टेज लावा प्रोड्यूस कर लिया हुआ है अपने अपने वॉल के अंदर, तो दिस egg with the second stage lava can remain infective for 3 years. उसको कुछ नहीं होगा. ठीक है, so this is with the lava is the infectivity associated. ठीक है, rhabdiform lava के साथ उसकी infectivity associate हुई हुई है. Clear? कि ये इसका जो है इन्फेक्टिव फॉर्म कौन सा है एंड व्हाई द अनसेगमेंटेड ओवम इज नॉट द इन्फेक्टिव फॉर्म. सो जब तक उसके अंदर वो ओवम रहता है तो इट इज नॉट इन्फेक्टिव, बट व्हेन इट कन्वर्ट्स आफ्टर द फर्स्ट मोल्टिंग इनटू द rhabdiform lava, so then it is known as the infective form of the ascaris. ठीक है, उसके बाद infection, third stage is the infection occurs by ingestion. ठीक है, so ingestion, ये सारी की सारी आपको स्टेजेस दिखाई. दिस इज द अनफर्टिलाइज्ड in the fecal matter, the unfertilized ovum is passed out into the soil, into the fields वगैरह, and वहां से it is going to go through the various stages of development until it forms this lava after the first molting, and this is going to take about 3 weeks time. And this is the infective form, and this is going to be swallowed, and once it is swallowed, it is going to go into the small intestines, and in the small intestines they are going to hatch these this cyst, the wall is going to break off, and these the rhabdiform larvae, they are going to hatch, they are going to invade the mucosa, and from the mucosa they are going to go and they are going to go into the portal circulation. From the portal circulation, they are then going to go into the systemic circulation, or systemic circulation, so they are going to go into the lungs. You need to remember each of these steps in the life cycle of Ascaris lumbricoides, because without these the cycle is not complete. ठीक है, अगर आप इतनी लिखते हो कि जी वो उसने मतलब through the fecal-oral route it gets the lava passes into the mouth, then it goes into the intestine where the male is going to where the adult male and females are going to form, and they are going to mate and start producing the eggs. You are not going to get any marks. Just remember that. ठीक है, आपको नंबर नहीं मिलेंगे, बिकॉज द मेजर चंक या मेजर इंपॉर्टेंस उसकी लाइफ साइकिल की वो है जो start होती है from the point the larvae hatch into the small intestine, then they invade the intestinal mucosa, then they go into the portal circulation initially. Portal circulation जो कि liver की circulation है, from there they go into the systemic circulation. Systemic circulation उसको carry करती है into the lungs. फिर lungs के अंदर जाने के बाद क्या होता है? After they go into the lungs, they are going to sit there and mature. उसमें 10 to 14 days लगते हैं. When these larvae mature in about 14 days time, then they are going to penetrate the alveolar walls. अभी ये adult forms नहीं बने, अभी ये सिर्फ larval forms हैं, and they are going to take about 2 weeks in the lungs to mature, to become mature further, or to become more sort of advanced in their life cycle. Once they have reached that maturity, they are going to penetrate the alveolar walls. They are going to come into the bronchioles. Bronchioles में they are going to travel along the bronchial tree, and फिर वो ऊपर की तरफ travel करते हैं. ठीक है, lungs में बैठे हुए थे, lungs में से वो bronchioles पे जो bronchioles छोटी हैं, फिर उधर से bronchi में जाते हैं, bronchi में जाके they are going to go into the main bronchus, और main bronchus में जाने के बाद they are going to go into the throat. जब throat में जाते हैं वहां जाके वो itching और इरिटेशन प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, और जब वो इरिटेशन प्रोड्यूस करते हैं तो रिफ्लेक्स क्या होता है? स्वॉलोइंग का. जब वो स्वॉलोइंग का रिफ्लेक्स होता है तो वो ये सारे के सारे लावे जो हैं दे गेट स्वॉलोड एंड दे गो डाउन through the esophagus into the stomach and then into the intestines. ठीक है, so this is the most important पॉइंट जो कि आप सब लोग जब भी जो लास्ट ईयर की मैंने पैरासाइटोलॉजी के क्वेश्चंस किए या एससीक्यूज में आप सब लोगों ने ये पार्ट वेरी कन्वीनियंटली सारा का सारा मिस कर दिया, और बाकी इंजेक्शन, इंटेस्टाइन, अडल्ट फॉर्म्स एंड देन द एग्स, व्हिच डज नॉट गेट यू एनी मार्क्स. देन this is now the second time that the larvae are going to reach the intestines. फर्स्ट टाइम तब था जब फीको ओरल रूट कंटामिनेशन की वजह से वो माउथ में आए, माउथ में आने के बाद वो इंटेस्टाइन में गए, इंटेस्टाइन के बाद वो उन्होंने, दैट वाज द इनिशियल स्टेज ऑफ देयर फर्स्ट स्टेज इन व्हिच दे पेनिट्रेटेड द इंटेस्टाइनल म्यूकोसा, और फर्स्ट टाइम जब वो स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन में आए थे, ठीक है। देन दे पास थ्रू द पोर्टल सिस्टमिक लंग्स, वहां पे उनकी मैच्योरिटी होती है, डेवलपमेंट होती है, पास अप इनटू द ब्रोंकाई, down the throat, into the throat, then down the esophagus, and then they come the second time into the small intestine. Or ab they are going to develop into the adult worms. And it requires 2 to 3 months from the ingestion of the infective eggs to the development of the adult females, and the mating of the adult male and female, and to the laying of the eggs by the adult female. Oviposition का मतलब होता है laying of the eggs, ठीक है। Adult worms can live for 1 to 2 years in your intestines. That is why ascaris infection is very common. That is why it is going to persist in the environment if proper treatment is not taken, and if the proper sanitation or hygiene measures are not taken, because ये बहुत commonly इसकी इतनी heavy infection होती है कि ये spread बहुत commonly करती है, and इसकी survival भी बहुत ज़्यादा है। इसके eggs and number, it's a huge number of eggs which they produce, and the adult worms can live 1 to 2 years. So the infection is from man to man, and auto infection can also occur. Auto infection क्या? बेटा why they need to go to the intestine, ये मुझे नहीं पता, इसलिए कि this is how nature has made it. Maybe जो environment उनको जो लावे हैं उनको जो environment मिलती है in the lungs, that is more conducive, that is more conducive to the development, क्योंकि intestines में आपके पास वहाँ food भी होता है, वहाँ बाकी debris भी होती है, और intestinal movements चल रही होती है. So intestinal movements के साथ वो they are going to go down into the with the intestinal movements, they are not going to remain in one place, they are going to go down and down into the intestines. So in the lungs they can stay for a longer time period, वहाँ कोई movement नहीं है, and they get a space where they can sort of sit calmly or develop into and have their developmental phases. That is probably the reason. Not washing hands after using bathroom and eating food is not auto-infection. In a way, it is auto-infection. You're right. कि आपने अगर हैंड वॉश नहीं किए और उन्हीं हाथों से अगर आपने खुद ही अपने आप को खाना वाना खिला लिया, तो दैट मीन्स ऑटो इन्फेक्शन. ऑटो मीन्स दैट द एग्स इन द फीसेस इन्फेक्ट द पर्सन इन देमसेल्व्स एंड द प्रॉपर हाइजीन इज नॉट मेंटेन्ड. यू आर राइट, एब्सोल्युटली. Mahnur is also right, and Maham is Shazmeen is also right, and Mahnur is also right. I hope I'm getting your names correct. आप दोनों का आइडिया ठीक है. It is when you reinfect yourself through your contaminated hands. So clinical features include the adult worms usually cause no acute symptoms. The symptoms are not because of the presence of these worms causing any damage to the intestinal wall or anything. The symptoms, they are related to the worm burden. अगर आपके few adult worms are present in the small intestine, they are not going to produce too many symptoms. 10 to 20 worms, they may go unnoticed except in a routine stool examination. कोई आपको उसमें अगर कोई routine examination और उसमें कोई ova नजर आ गया scaris का, तो you can pick up that infection. Or at times in children they can pass out these sometimes a worm can be passed out, but this is very rare. In case of higher burdens, abdominal pain होगा, intestinal obstruction होगी. उसके अलावा when there are a larger number of worms present in the intestine, there is more likelihood of their being passed out in the stool, both the ova as well as the adult worms. Now, what are the symptoms present in which are going to be present in such individuals? Symptoms, we can divide them into two groups. Number one, those which are because of the adult worms, and those which are because of the larval forms. So due to the adult worms, there can be two symptoms, spoliative or toxic. Spoliative का मतलब ये है कि आप जो adult worms हैं, they are going to sit there and they are going to take the nutrition from the host, and this is going to result in malnutrition. It is going to result in a deficiency of various vitamins, especially vitamin A, and this is known as the spoliative action. Then we have the toxic effects. Toxic effects because वो toxins भी produce करें, irritants भी produce करें, which are going to go into your circulation, and once it goes into the circulation, it can goes to various areas of the body, and thus therefore it can result in fever, urticaria, edema of the face, conjunctivitis or meningitis. फिर adult worms की वजह से there can be certain mechanical effects. Mechanical effects से मतलब ये है कि because of their presence they are going to produce certain effects in the body. अब मैकेनिकल इफेक्ट्स में इंटरसेप्शन हो सकती है. मैकेनिकल इफेक्ट्स का मतलब ये है कि वो एक जगह पे बहुत सारे अगर वर्म्स इकट्ठे हो जाते हैं और एक बॉल सा बना लेते हैं तो दे कैन कॉज इंटेस्टाइनल ऑब्स्ट्रक्शन. ठीक है, दे कैन कॉज द इंटरसेप्शन. ये होता है कि जब एक पोर्शन ऑफ द इंटेस्टाइन फॉर्म्स अ स्लीव ओवर द अदर पोर्शन. ठीक है, सो वो एक सॉर्ट ऑफ एक यू शेप्ड उसकी जो है वो एक कवरिंग सी बना लेते हैं इंटेस्टाइनल वॉल की, डबल कवरिंग. उसकी वजह से उसका ल्यूमन छोटा हो जाता है. ठीक है, अगेन ऑब्स्ट्रक्शन के सिम्टम्स शुरू हो जाते हैं. देन एट टाइम्स एक एरिया में इतने सारे वहां पे वो वर्म्स बैठे हुए होते हैं एंड दे आर utilizing the nutrition that they can cause damage. आहिस्ता आहिस्ता they can cause damage to the intestinal wall और वहां पे perforation हो सकती है. Then they can be ectopic ascariasis. Ectopic ascariasis का मतलब ये है कि apart from the small intestine they can go to other areas where they normally they are not going to be present और वहां पे वो जाके symptoms produce कर सकते हैं, are most commonly because of obstruction. For example, instead of going down, these adult worms they can travel up the intestine and they can go into the biliary tract, और biliary tract में जाके they can cause obstruction to the biliary canals और फिर वो सारे के सारे बिलियरी ऑब्स्ट्रक्शन के जॉन्डिस के फीचर्स डेवलप होने शुरू हो जाएंगे. और दे कैन गो इवन फर्दर, स्टमक के अंदर से जाके वो एसोफेगस में से जाके वो माउथ के अंदर चले जाते हैं और माउथ के अंदर जाने के बाद दे कैन कम आउट ऑफ द माउथ और द नोज. ठीक है, सो दीज आर द एक्टोपिक साइट्स. दीज आर नॉट द नॉर्मल साइट्स ऑफ एस्कैरिस एंड दे आर कॉज्ड बाय द अडल्ट वर्म्स. सो Scariasis is another feature of the adult worms. Then they are the features which are going to be caused by the larva. During the lung phase of the larval migration, which is most important, pulmonary like cough, dyspnea, they can be blood in the sputum, and they can be a pneumonia because of the eosinophils generated because of the parasitic infection. अब कफ, डिस्निया, हेमोप्टिसिस, eosinophilic pneumonitis, इन सब चीजों को जब आप मिलाते हैं तो then it is known as an ascaris pneumonia. ठीक है, ascaris pneumonia because of the pneumonia which is being produced by the larval forms of ascaris lumbricoides. ठीक है, because of life cycle में उसका lungs में जाना है, so when it goes into the lungs it stays there for 10 to 14 days. जब वो 10 to 14 days पे वहां पे रहता है तो then it can cause various irritation and inflammatory responses, and if it is severe या number of larvae are huge, it can result in dyspnea, it can result in hemoptysis, or at the end it can cause a pneumonia. And this pneumonia is also known as the Loeffler syndrome because इस बंदे ने इसको identify किया था. So ascaris pneumonia और Loeffler syndrome आपको commonly MCQs में या आपके वाइवा में पूछा जाता है. Coming to the diagnosis, in the diagnosis we have the direct evidence and we have an indirect evidence. Direct evidence में क्या होता है? Remember, whenever we are talking about nematodes, there is going to be a direct evidence in which we are going to demonstrate the eggs either in the feces or in this case, as you know, it is in the duodenum or the jejunum. तो आप duodenal aspirate by gastroscopy ले सकते हो and you can examine that aspirate for the presence of the eggs. Then number 2, you can demonstrate the larvae in the sputum. Bronchoscopy हो सकती है, वहां से specimen लिया जा सकता है and you can demonstrate the larvae in the sputum. And third is the demonstration of the adult worms in the stool. ठीक है, so this is the direct evidence. Direct evidence में हमेशा eggs, adult worm या larval forms, whichever the forms we are dealing with, और जो जहां जहां वो मौजूद हैं वहां से आप specimen लेंगे and you are going to identify them. Indirect evidence basically. जी हेलो.
मैम
जी
मैम स्लाइड चेंज नहीं हो रही.
अच्छा बेटा, ठीक है.
मैम चेक कर लें जरा.
अच्छा बेटा. मेरी तरफ से बेटा हो रही है। हाँ, अच्छा ठीक है, थैंक यू। वो हो गया हुआ है, वो बहुत पुराना इशू था। अच्छा, इनडायरेक्ट एविडेंस में वी हैव eosinophilia, and then we can have a skin test, कोई भी dermal allergic reaction जिसको हम बोलते हैं, and then there can be serial diagnosis through ELISA और indirect heme agglutination ऐसे हो सकता है, या indirect fluorescent ऐसे हो सकता है। कोई भी serial diagnosis में you can utilize the जो हमने हमने सिलॉजिकल टेक्निक्स पढ़ी हुई हैं, उन सब में से कोई भी हम यूटिलाइज कर सकते हैं, बट मोस्ट कॉमनली आईएचए या एलाइजा यूज होता है। ठीक है, these are the Ascaris lumbricoides eggs in the feces. As I told you, they were fertilized, oval, thick walled होते हैं, pile stained होते हैं, और this is the albuminous coating. And then these are the, again, let's go skip this, these are the adult worms which you can see. And ये एक patient में से एक ये जो था, जब उन्होंने उसका intestines खोले तो इतने ज्यादा worms एक patient में से निकले और intestinal obstruction cause कर रहे थे। Any questions? Any questions, Rita? Anything you would like to ask? Okay, then see you next week, inshallah. ठीक है, the Facebook page is open for any questions. Allah Hafiz to all of you. Take care.